Joined now by Kyler Staley from thehoosier.com. Kyler was at the game last night as well. One thing I saw from start to finish, Indiana was never pushed by Nebraska. Not one time. Not at one time did I think that Nebraska was, oh man, this is going to be a game. Now they got it to single digits once in the second half, but that was as close as they got. And it was just, you never felt that the Indiana was ever really in any trouble of this game getting away from them. I didn't think.
I agree with that. Obviously, the turnover situation. I mean, any other team that's not Nebraska, if that's an Ohio State, Arizona, whoever, a better team, they're going to take advantage of those turnovers. So Indiana got very, very lucky in that end. But yeah, I agree with you. You never thought that the game was in jeopardy. Even though when they did go to single digits, you knew somebody was going to make a play. Usually it was either Trace Jackson Davis or Trey Galloway, both who had phenomenal games. Throw in Miller Kopp and Tamar Bates, who also were big contributors last night, leading Indiana to win. But Indiana just came out with a lot more fire than they did at Rutgers. They came out with energy. They played fast, maybe just a little bit too fast at times. But the most important thing is that they brought their toughness back. That defense was really locked down last night, I thought. And they got their first win of the Big Ten season. So, a little bit momentum heading into this weekend.
Kyler, last night, Trey, Reggie Miller, Galloway really stepped up and played a lot better than he did against Rutgers. But the thing that stood out to me was not necessarily that he set a career high for his point total, but the fact that he looked more comfortable shooting the basketball than he did a few days ago at Rutgers. Was there any sort of conversation about Trey being a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident? Because I didn't think in the Rutgers game he just looked out of place. Maybe that was because he got his first start of the season. He was trying to mesh with that starting rotation. He looked a lot more comfortable. He was a little bit more aggressive with the ball, not just settling for threes, but he drove to the basket a few times. Was there some sort of conversation, or was there some sort of initiative there for him to take more advantage and be more comfortable shooting the ball? Or was it just a circumstance where Nebraska maybe played off of him a little bit more and gave him more opportunities, and then his confidence built?
Well, a few things here. One, just for him playing a lot more comfortable. You go back to the Rutgers game, that Jalen Hood-Schifino injury, that was a last-second thing. Jalen Hood-Schifino was warming up before the game, and he just couldn't go. So, Trey's gets thrown in there, not really prepared. So Trey had a few more days to kind of prepare for this role to do so. But as far as his shooting, we talked to him after the game in the press conference. He said with his groin injury over the summer, all he could do was shoot. So it was just nonstop, steady repetition with him. And it was every day. I mean, he missed most of the summer. So every day you add in 60-plus days there of him just, shooting the basketball, just working on his form, working on his confidence. And Trey Galloway's played with a ton of confidence this year already. And, I mean, his three-point shot looks good. Like, you actually feel as a fan, you actually feel like he has a shot to make those shots. Last night, I mean, there was just a game where he was feeling himself. I mean, 4 of 6 from the three. I mean, big reason why Indiana shot 44%. He played great, and that's good to see from Trey. Hopefully he can carry that momentum and everything once he goes back to his bench role. Because he does need to, I mean, not to say he needs to go to the bench, but Indiana's bench does need him in a way. They are missing that part of him. I mean, that's one less bench guy that Woodson has to, play. So we'll see there. But overall, Trey Galloway was, other than Trace Jackson Davis was this triple double, I would say Trey Galloway was the MVP of the night last night.
Yeah, and it's the fact that he does that a game after going scoreless in 31 minutes of action. It shows how different nights, different games, different guys can and will step up. And I talked earlier about how invaluable these minutes are for Trey Galloway and Tamar. Tamar getting maybe a few more minutes because of this situation now than he normally has. But both of them have been playing at a higher and higher level. And that's what's needed for this team to be Final Four good. I saw someone earlier say this is not a Final Four team. No, not right now. It's not. I agree with that. Until they can consistently shoot the ball and not turn the ball over, they're not a Final Four team. But having these guys forced to play these extra minutes in November and early December is going to pay great dividends come February and March.
Yeah, I mean the depth of Indiana. That is the advantage there for Mike Woodson and his staff. With Trey having to be inserted, it lessened to 8 players. I thought maybe last night you see a little bit more of CJ Gunn, but he stuck with the 8 main guys that are kind of running that, and they did fine. Obviously, there was a spell where Xavier Johnson picked up 2 fouls, so he had to hit the bench, and he struggled last night. Everyone knows about that. But I thought Tamar Bates and Trey Galloway did a really good job interchanging, running the I guess you would say the second unit. With that, both guys, Mike Woodson's very comfortable, and a lot of his guards, to run that point guard position. And they kind of proved it last night. Like I said, Trey Galloway, Tamar Bates, they showed that they can run an offense, and they did so very well, especially Trey Galloway.
And I thought these last 2 games, I don't want to harp on it too much because we're still early in the season. We're only, 9 games into the season. So, but the last 2 games, Xavier Johnson has not played well. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well against Rutgers. And then last night I think he counted for 7 turnovers if you count those 2 fouls. Is that more of a comfort thing for him with not having Jalen Hood-Schifino on the floor? Do you think he's I don't want to say pressing because he didn't take a lot of bad shots last night. He just felt like he was trying to do too much, almost put the team too much on his shoulders. And I don't know if that's Jalen Hood-Schifino not being in the lineup because we really hadn't seen that through the first 7 games of the season.
Yeah, and I think that Xavier Johnson, before Jalen's injury, I think he finally just got comfortable playing alongside with them.
Right.
Same with Jalen. You saw what he did in the North Carolina game where that backcourt finally clicked.
Yep.
And I feel for Xavier Johnson in a way because it did throw off his game a little bit. And he's reverting back to that old, like the very first time that we saw Xavier Johnson, the Notre Dame game last year, the early part of the season. We're seeing that Xavier Johnson. We're not seeing the Xavier Johnson, from the Big Ten tournament. It is a little concerning. I will say, especially the turnover rate right now, he's just playing a little bit too fast. I don't know. He's just got to realize that there's a lot of talent on that team. He doesn't have to do it all, even though I know he wants to. That's just kind of his mentality. But hopefully with Jalen Hood-Schifino, hopefully he's back this weekend. We'll see how his injury is. I think you'll see Xavier Johnson play much better when Hood-Schifino's back in the lineup.
Well, there's no question. I think that he's still pushing. And Trey Galloway is not Jalen Hood-Schifino, which is obvious. They have very different games. I think that Trey is a better shooter right now than Jalen is. He's shown that from that work that he's put into that, and has shown a little bit of that. But he's not the playmaker that Jalen Hood-Schifino is. He's not the passer that Jalen Hood-Schifino is. He can't see the floor like Jalen Hood-Schifino. And that's not a knock on Trey Galloway. That's because Jalen Hood-Schifino is a 5-star. And I'm not saying it just because he's a 5-star because he has those qualities. I've seen it, watched it. He does. And Indiana is not going to be as good without him in the lineup, period, end of story. But having him back in the lineup, having Trey Galloway coming off the bench, this team can be strong, but I think that I don't know that they can win. It's not can, but I don't know that they would win against Arizona without Jalen Hood-Schifino in the lineup. But then you have to wonder what percentage is he back? Is he 70, 80%? Are they holding him out? Is he ready to go? That stuff we won't know until Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously a big piece for those Indiana teams. I mean, they're a completely different team when he's on the floor. These last 2 games, you've pretty much seen last year's Indiana team a little bit. Just a little uncomfortable at times on the offense. Xavier Johnson doing a little bit too much. Luckily, we've seen improvements from Trey Galloway, Tamar Bates, and Miller Kopp, those kind of guys where they've stepped up and they've been able to kind of push through. You saw that last night. But Jalen Hood-Schifino back in the lineups probably better sooner than later for Indiana, especially once they start getting into the Big Ten play and everything. So his health is probably going to be something to watch out for the remaining of the season, just for that reason. Same thing with Trace Jackson Davis. He's playing, but he's still got that lingering back issue and everything. So it's all about, Indiana's had a history of, untimely, health problems. Hopefully they can kind of, pass through that. Hopefully they get Jalen Hood-Schifino back. Arizona this Saturday, because without them, I don't know how Indiana is going to be able to make enough plays on the floor to get that win.
We talk a lot about some of the getting a little nitpicky after a 16-point win. So one of the things I did notice, I thought that was a positive last night, Kyler, was it seemed like anytime Nebraska made some sort of run. And I know really the only time they made some sort of push was early in that second half when they got the lead down to a 7-point game. But I thought that anytime Nebraska really made some sort of push, Indiana kind of slowed down their offense, passed the ball around, got a good look. Maybe they didn't always hit it, but they got a good look. And a lot of times they did convert on those shots. I mean, I thought you saw the maturity of an experienced team, even again, without Jalen Hood-Schifino, with some of your rotations, maybe a little not what they're going to typically be throughout the season. I was impressed at the fact that they didn't try to hurry up and get a quick 2 points or try to, at the snap of a finger, end Nebraska's drought. They were patient. They got good looks at the basket. And I thought that was a step of something we hadn't seen maybe from this team in the last couple of years. Just a lot of maturity and the wherewithal to go, you know what? We don't have to get a 2 points here in the next 5 seconds. Let's get a good shot, make this possession count. And I think after Nebraska cut it to 7, I think they got a 3 and pushed it right back up to 10. And that was pretty much the end of the game. So really impressed with that from that experience and just being able to know to slow it down and get a good shot as opposed to trying to just, stop the bleeding with a quick 2.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. This team's easily one of the most mature teams Indiana's had in a long time. I would say going back to Yogi Ferrell's senior year, I would say that, that team was very mature, a lot of leaders. And you see, a lot of leadership on the floor this year. Trace Jackson-Davis does an amazing job with that. Race Thompson, Miller Cobb, those guys really take pride in being leaders of this team. And you're right. I mean, Indiana's when Nebraska would get on a run, yes, Indiana kind of started that second half very, not a whole lot of energy there, which was shocking to me considering how many turnovers they had in the first half. You figured they'd come out with a little bit more fire, but Indiana's they're a very smart team. I'll say that. They know that they have good players on their team, and they know that they don't need to rush, this year. Right. I mean, there are moments where they get in, fast-paced environments and everything. You saw with Xavier, he played just a little bit too fast. I go back to last night. There was a play, I think right before the first half, where Xavier Johnson tried to push it out 1 versus 5 in transition. As soon as he crossed the half-court line, Mike Wilson called the timeout. So, they still struggle with those kind of problems and everything. But, luckily, they're smart enough to say, hey, Nebraska's getting on a run here. Let's not force anything. And that just shows the maturity of this team.
They had 14 points in the paint against Rutgers and 38, I think. 38 against Nebraska last night. And there's not a ton of difference in roster size between those two teams, but Rutgers just wanted it more, worked way harder at preventing Indiana from being successful in the paint, number one. But also last night, Indiana, it was not just race and trace. It was far from it. Everybody was scoring in the paint, whether it was even Xavier trying to get there where he didn't, he had a 2 for 8 night, but Miller Kopp scored points in the paint. Tamar Bates scored points in the paint. Trey Galloway scored points in the paint. So it was a much, much more shared offense last night.
Yeah, the ball movement was incredible for Indiana. Obviously not as good at Rutgers, so that kind of proved to be true, with the way Indiana played. But the ball movement was excellent last night. Like you said, they were scoring a bunch in the paint. If you compare Rutgers to Nebraska, Rutgers has got just a little bit more talent in their front court than Nebraska does. And it showed. I mean, Trace Jackson-Davis was really quick about getting out of double teams. The thing that always impresses me with Trace Jackson-Davis when he's in double team situations, his court vision out of those is just fantastic. And he made some amazing passes, as you saw with 10 assists last night. So, but yeah, the paint was very easy for Indiana. They crashed the glass a lot better than they did at Rutgers, won like 35-25 on the rebounding battle. But yeah, Indiana, they took advantage of the paint situation there last night.
And to talk more about that offense, 22 assists on 32 made field goals.
Incredible.
That's 66% basically of your shots. That's an astoundingly high number.
On top of that, just real quick, TJD accounts for half of that. So that's insane.
There you go. Exactly. Wow. 10 assists. It's right. 10 assists for the big man. And that shows another element to his game that Indiana needs to continue to exploit, because that would add another element to this offense of him being a passer out of the post and not just a scorer. Because if they can get these guys to having these consistent performances, especially the guys off the bench, Bates and Galloway, Geronimo was kind of a missing piece there. Malik Renew seems to have plateaued a little bit.
Yeah, he's just struggled playing better competition. Indiana's going to really need him to stay out of foul trouble this weekend because Arizona's got some very talented bigs. So Malik Renew is going to be one of those key pieces for Indiana this weekend. So he's just got to be aware of that. Hopefully we see a much better game from him.